A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to video games that are totally awesome. I feel like that in terms of other titles that correlate to anything that's much older, like beyond the PS3 era, I feel like that there are a number of examples that I could talk about that I have actually been known for way over the years. And in terms of the earliest known years possible, the PlayStation 1, of course, was the first console that I had gotten a hold of. And eventually PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5, they would all eventually come around in due time in each of their own segments. But for the PS1, especially between 2001 and 2004, that was a point when, of course, that was one of the very first consoles that I had ever worked around. And while there was also the likes of the Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn, the thing is, the PS1 definitely had a lot of memories. There were tons of games that I had played over the years. There was a Blue's Clues game, a Bob the Builder game, a couple Final Fantasy titles, a couple of horror and action adventure titles, and several other bits scattered around here and there. But we definitely can't forget a few of the most memorable bits that I have been known for would include Spyro, Croc, Rayman, the Dukes of Hazzard games, and I've even tried a game called Rallycross at one point. So you could say that while the PS1 entry wasn't exactly a huge thing for me to work with, it at least did help knowing the fact it was one of the first consoles I'd ever played, and obviously not much would have been expected out of it at the time. Eventually PS2 would come around, and well, the rest is pretty much history. One of the games I might as well talk about on that front though is known as Rayman. And let's not forget that while Rayman was exactly as a 2D sort of side scroller, knowing that it also was on the Atari Jaguar at some point, but like some games and franchises that came around with it, they were able to jump ship before it sank. And such consoles like the Jaguar, Saturn, 3DO, and whatnot would all eventually die out at some point due to not so great sales marketing and whatnot. Rayman, of course, did make it to the PS1 in '95 and was indeed one of the first to have come around to the platform. And what I will say is that having played the game and also making it one of the best that I've remembered from that platform, Rayman on the PlayStation was certainly a unique thing. Because one thing that I might as well make clear is that comparing CD to cartridge-based games, one notable difference is there. Cutscenes. Lots of them. PlayStation is indubitably well known for having cutscenes more so than any other games on any other format, especially cartridges, because CD-based technology has allowed for much more broader variety in terms of what functions that a game can serve. You have the gameplay itself, of course, which sometimes tends to run better on CDs with a lot more smoother and precise performance, but also the implementation of cutscenes and other add-ons to the game's own software and coding do allow for many things to happen. But of course, Rayman on PS1, as I've remembered every single time I played it, we got ourselves a couple of company logos. We got an opening cutscene, which of course features a guy in a hat. And let's not forget, these are actually characters in which they have disembodied hands and feet. As in, there's no arms or legs attached to them. So one could imagine, my arm is basically all gone, and all I got are my fists. But that's just basically the unique, humorous nature of these games. Because they definitely implement a sense of disembodiment, the kind of humor that plays within. But at the same time though, this is the sort of character design that we've come to love over the years. And Rayman certainly was not the only type of character to have this sort of partial disembodiment, with only visible limbs out there for walking and grabbing onto things. Yeah, a lot of the basic stuff that is known for when we're working with these types of limbs. Anyways though, this guide basically explains to us about the story of Rayman A world in which that nature and people live in peace together, and the world itself is basically held together by a number of different things. You have the electums, for instance, which supposedly work as a means of atomic production. I can't really say all that much about the world because not very much is explained about how it all works. But the thing is, Rayman's world is simply made almost like an atom, pretty much, where it involves neutrons, electrons, protons, etc. They're all necessary for initiating full balance of the world itself. Unfortunately, though, there are some bad guys around, and an arch enemy comes out of nowhere, steals the many electrons, and the Guardians do unfortunately try to stop him, but he gets away. And you know what happens when some critical components go missing? Chaos ensues. The world that Rayman has once known quite well over the years is now seen as a land of harsh conditions, survival of the fittest. And now all of these different people that Rayman's known about are unfortunately now prisoners in the wrath of this not so great character. So what does Rayman have to do? Well, he has to get out of his vacation, for a little while at least, and go save all these people that he's known. And this kidnapper, as soon as Rayman finds him, he is going to have to take him down for good. That's basically the main gist of the game itself. A guy is coming around, kidnapped some people, and left the world imbalanced. Very imbalanced. And Rayman is set out to stop him. It's that sort of typical storyline that we technically get in a lot of different games where something bad happens and the main antagonist does something wrong, and it's up to our main protagonist to fix the damage and take this guy down. It seems to be a little too common of a narrative. Something that's still around today. And while there's a lot more elaborate ways to cycle the story and allow it to become more complex, and therefore not so monotonous to our minds, let's be real here. Rayman was definitely something from '95. The first level, of course, does take us to some side-scrolling action. We do, of course, get some helpful tips along the way and even some special power-ups, thanks to a sorceress who comes around. She is able to give us the likes of various different powers, including a super punch, the ability to helicopter with Rayman's own hair, and a number of other things. I will admit, every time I played the game, I've hardly ever gotten very far into the game itself. I've only gotten to like level 3. And let's talk a bit about the levels themselves. We're first set up in the jungles, in which that a number of characters will pop out of nowhere, and sometimes Rayman will get hurt from a hiccup-like sound that he makes. I don't know, I guess that hiccup noise is supposed to insinuate that you made the hiccup, which actually sounds kind of clever. Having a hiccup sound to indicate that you got hit, yeah, meaning that you made the hiccup. I find that to be a little funny at this point. But then, of course, we can't forget full-on death. A unique cartoony sort of sting that ensues. Like when you fall in the water, for instance. Yeah, it seems to be a common trope just as well. Some characters just can't swim. I don't know exactly why you wouldn't want your character to swim. Wouldn't that be a really cool ability to do? Besides, there's some games in which that swimming happens to be such a big deal here and there. So what exactly is the deal with all that? But anyways, though, as I progress further into the game itself with all the different enemies and the giant berries that I gotta punch in order to make it through the water, yeah, the berries apparently double as life rafts in a way. So that way you don't have to worry about falling in the water. There are, of course, not just characters that come around that you can take down. They walk around. There's also guys that can shoot. There's also guys that can swing down. And then, of course, there's one of the first boss characters, basically a giant mosquito. Yeah. Of course, after hitting him a few times, you eventually tend to him, and believe it or not, in the following level, it becomes a flying stage in which that you allow flight with this mosquito whom he just fought. That's also kind of a unique cliche that goes down, where the enemy now becomes an ally after you beat him up. I mean, remember the Sonic games where Knuckles attacked Sonic and Tails until they convince him that Eggman's the real bad guy? This is kind of the same thing, except you're not fighting a evil super genius. But in any case though, as Rayman continues forward, going further into the game, the many different levels, at least from what I've understood so far, there's many more levels that would follow afterwards with a number of different themes that take place. There's supposedly a musical sort of world where you can literally pounce on treble clefs, for instance. I mean, that's pretty unique. Might as well be in Wayne's World at this point if we're going to talk music. But then, of course, while I don't exactly know all that much more about the game as it stands currently, I've only played so much of it back in the day. And even now, with more modern ROMs, there's only so much more that I've done with it. So, do forgive me on that part. But hey, as I've said, the main goal is to take down this kidnapper. But we certainly can't forget that even after this game had come and gone, it still was actually a success. Whether for the Jaguar, the PlayStation, or other ports that it made it to at the time. Because there were actually more games that would follow, with one of the most recent being Rayman Legends in 2017 for the PS4. And the thing is, I could probably talk a bit more about that game in comparison to some of the others I've done so far. Just think, while I will talk more about older games in this series, I might as well include other bits that I haven't exactly had the chance to talk about just yet. So, with that in mind, what I'm going to do is, I'll probably save Rayman Legends for some other time, but considering what this was, and considering that this was one of the first big games that I played, I'm happy to give Rayman 1995 a good 7.3 out of 10.1. It was a good starting point back in the time, but over time, it sure did grow to be a pretty unique and lovable series. There weren't just any characters like Rayman with that special sort of disembodiment that is known as the common theme for Rayman and all of his friends. But above all that though, I don't really suppose we'll have any more Rayman related stuff going on, knowing that Legends wasn't too great. But stick around, and maybe I'll have plenty to share on that part. So make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.